All right, all. So last video, I talked about kind of the history of computer languages. In this video, we're going to talk specifically about the language we're going to use, which is P5.JS. Okay. What is P5.JS? Well, P5.JS is what we call a JavaScript library. We'll come back to what a JavaScript library is first, but let's first talk about what is JavaScript. So JavaScript is a programming language, okay? We talked about various programming languages being developed. It was developed in 1995 to specifically work with browsers, okay? So there was an internet before 1995, but the thing about it is a lot of the tasks that we wanted to do couldn't really be done without some sort of programming language, okay? So for instance, I'm going to let's go to Amazon real quick, okay? And let's just say for the sake of argument, I want to buy, I don't know, I want to buy some Pokemon cards because why not, right? So I want to click on this add to cart, okay? So I'm saying I'm going to purchase this item, okay? So what we really need to do is we need to save the fact we have data. The data is Mr. Hurwitz is, buying these Pokemon cards, right? And they're, I don't know, $20 and something cents, right? And then we need to save that data so that eventually when I go to the checkout, we can call that data back and be like, hey, Mr. Hurwitz was buying Pokemon cards and their value was $20.50, and maybe he purchased another item and that was $10. So $20 plus $10 equals he owes $30, right? All of that ability to like do math, add and subtract, store data, like what items I purchased, how much did that item cost, that kind of stuff. There's really no way to do that with purely HTML and CSS. You know what I mean? Like we can't store it. There's no way to do that basic math calculation with HTML, and CSS's job is only to stylize things. It doesn't let you perform tasks like adding or subtracting. Okay. So what they figured out was like, okay, if we want to do more complicated things on the internet, we need to have a programming language that can handle these tasks. Okay. And that's where JavaScript comes in. Traditionally, JavaScript runs through what's called the JavaScript engine. So every browser, like Chrome or whatever, you have a JavaScript engine. I can actually look at it here. It's called console. And this is where the JavaScript runs, okay? I could technically do something here if I say, I just type in a computational idea, 10 plus 20 equals, and then I get the value of 30. So it did a mathematical calculation for me. 30 divided by 4 is 7.5, okay? So my JavaScript engine here is actually doing tasks for me, okay? So traditionally your JavaScript ran through that engine. Since 2009, you could, if you wanted to, run JavaScript outside of a browser. There's something called, so you could use JavaScript if you wanted to make mobile apps and stuff like that. P5 is what we call a JavaScript library. What is a library? Well, think about a library in real life. What is a library in real life? A lot of times it's a physical place, like a building, and it stores stuff like books or records, old records. I mean, like, literal like musical records, or like if you went to like the Hall of Records, at some government building, it's like there's all these, pieces of paper stored in specific folders and all that kind of stuff, right? So when we talk about a library, at least what we call a code library, what a code library really is, it's a collection of pre-written code. Okay. So the way I kind of explain it is like, let's just say for the sake of argument, I'm just gonna build a file here. This is going to be a style sheet, and I'm just going to call it, style.css. And let's just say for the sake of argument, I just decide I'm going to set up this document and it's going to, it's whatever I want it to be. Oops, sorry, I forgot the semicolon there. There we go. All right. I don't know. I'm just setting up stuff and I could set up a bunch of CSS. And then like I write a whole bunch of CSS here. And just imagine I gave you the file, right? So like you didn't have to write this. I gave it to you. It's already done. And then you could just make your own HTML file and just add this in, right? And that's essentially what a JavaScript library is, except it's not CSS code, it's JavaScript code, okay? So in other words, a JavaScript library is a file that has just a bunch of JavaScript in it that we're going to take advantage of, okay? So that's what a general JavaScript library is. When we talk about P5, P5 is a JavaScript library that's used to help us learn code in this class. P5.JS specifically is a library that has a lot of what I would call visual code. It lets you do things that are very visual, like setting a color or building a visual circle or something like that. Okay. Sometimes people refer to P5.JS as a way to as a way to create visual expression with code. Okay. If you want to go to their official website, there's a link to it, by the way, right there. Okay. And this is their official website. If you haven't been to it in a while, it might look a little different. They changed it about a year ago. Okay. If you want to code, you can go down here to where it says start coding and you can start to code. We'll talk about that in a second. You can read more about the project here. There are code references. This is kind of like, remember how with W3 schools, we could look up HTML and CSS code references. This is like that, but for JavaScript. We'll talk more about this a little later. Has some tutorials if you want to try on your own outside of what I'm teaching you guys. There's like examples. There's a whole community if you want to like, talk to other people, that kind of stuff. All right. So that's P5. So here's some kind of general kind of questions I get sometimes. Is P5.JS the same as JavaScript? The answer is yes. P5 is actually built out of JavaScript. Think of JavaScript like the term ice cream, and P5 is a flavor of that ice cream, okay? So imagine just JavaScript is the concept of ice cream, and P5.JS is chocolate, and AngularJS is vanilla, and Grunt.js is strawberry, and there's new ones all the time. So there's all these different JavaScript libraries. They're all made of JavaScript. They're just different versions of JavaScript. Okay. So are React.js, AngularJS related to P5.JS? The answer is yes. They're actually all versions of JavaScript. So they all follow the same syntax and rules and that kind of stuff. They're just different versions, and people typically use them for different reasons. The way I like to think of it, like I said, is they're all ice cream. They're just different flavors of ice cream. Chocolate, strawberry, vanilla. Excuse me. Is JavaScript the same as Java? No, they're completely different languages. They're both programming languages, but they don't work the same way. They don't use the same syntax or the same structure or anything like that. Why are there so many programming languages? Good question. I mentioned before that typically programming languages are usually meant to make tasks easier and more efficient. Sometimes some programming languages are really set up to do certain tasks, like develop for, say, web pages or develop for your phone or something like that. You know what I mean? So the way I kind of look at it is if I was a woodworker or a metal worker or a a tailor or a seamstress or something like that, there's all these different tools you can have. If I was a woodworker, I can have like a chop saw and a circular saw and a hammer and a screwdriver and various tools, right? And some tools might work better than others in certain situations. In the same way, if I'm trying to create something like an application, there are pros and cons to using different types of computer languages. Some might you know, some may require more writing, like literal lines of code. Some might be able to take advantage of certain things better or faster than other languages can. So it's like, in the same way, like I might use different tools within being a woodworker. You might, even though it's all programming, you may use different languages to do certain tasks. Okay. Hopefully that kind of clears it up a little bit. So let's talk about the idea of syntax. Okay. I've talked about this idea before when talking about HTML and CSS, but I just kind of want to bring it up again. So syntax means the written rules of a language. Okay. So if I was talking about English, there are correct and incorrect ways of writing English. Okay. Rules of English, we don't think of them as rules, but they are. So rules might be something like, sentences start with a capital letter. Okay. If I don't start with a capital letter, that's grammatically incorrect, aka it's wrong. Okay. Sentences end with a period. Okay. So if I don't put a period at the end of my sentence, that's a run-on sentence. That's grammatically incorrect. When listing multiple items, use commas. Okay. And we could do the same thing for, if we're talking about HTML or CSS, there are also syntax rules of how you correctly write it and not, how it's right or incorrect. So if I'm talking about HTML, you know, um, tags go within angled brackets, right? Like this, those are angled brackets. If you use a different type of bracket, that's incorrect, it's wrong. HTML attributes go within the HTML tag. In other words, like I can do something like this. This is an HTML attribute and value that would go inside, the name of the tag. Most tags have closing tags, which are repetition of the opening tag. With a forward slash in front. Okay. So in other words, and so there are more to HTML and we could talk about it. And, you do the same thing with CSS. There's ways of properly writing CSS and incorrect ways of writing CSS, right? So when we talk about JavaScript, we're going to have some rules. And these are rules we're going to talk about, and it's going to come up of how you properly write JavaScript and you improperly write, JavaScript. I'm going to warn you that unfortunately running JavaScript is a lot more. Previously, when you guys are doing HTML and CSS, you guys might have made mistakes, but the browser was being very nice and let the code run even though there was a mistake. JavaScript's not going to be as forgiving. I'm just going to warn you about that. But some of them are things like, with JavaScript, code statements end with a semicolon. Okay. So if I write something in JavaScript code like this, let x equals 5, if I do not put that semicolon there, this statement does not end. And if I do any more coding after that, it just kind of goes on as like a never-ending statement, kind of like a run-on sentence. Code is case sensitive, meaning lowercase a and uppercase a are different. We're going to be running functions which have names. We're going to be creating variables which are going to have names. So if I make a variable called my name and my name, even though they're spelled the same, the fact that I'm using a capital letter there and I'm not using a capital letter there, your computer would consider these two things different from each other. Even though as humans, we'd go, those are the same thing. That's not how a computer would look at that, or that's not how the JavaScript engine is going to look at that. Okay. For naming conventions with variables and functions, so eventually you guys are going to come up with names of things. This is called naming conventions. No, just generally no spaces, no special characters. Special characters are like $, ampersand, hashtag, that kind of stuff. Okay. So basically just letters and numbers is how you should do it. Okay. When we have code blocks, which we'll talk about that goes inside curly brackets as opposed to angled brackets. Okay. So these are some rules, and there's definitely a lot more, and we'll definitely talk about all the various rules. But we would call that writing JavaScript the syntax. Okay. There is a correct way to write JavaScript and an incorrect way to write JavaScript. And if you don't write it correctly, what's going to happen is your program's not going to run correctly and it will have an error or a computer bug. Okay. All right, let's talk about writing Java or writing P5.JS. So I talked about the official website, which is P5.JS. What you guys are going to do, at least for now, for the first couple of classes, we're going to write our code within the website. I'm going to go to where it says start coding, which should be at the bottom left for you guys. And that's going to give me this. Okay. This is your code editor. Kind of looks a little bit like this, but with a white background. And then this should be blank. If you want to run code, the way it works is you click on the little plus sign, or you hit the little play button, I should say, and it should run your code. You want to stop running your code, hit the stop button there. Okay. Now, by default, you're probably going to see something that looks like this. I strongly recommend that you guys create a P5.JS account. The way that you would do that is when you go into the editor, you can go to the top right where it says sign up, and then you can create an account. The reason why you want to make an account is so that then you can actually save the code that you write. Otherwise, you won't be able to save it. I'm just going to log in with my... Now, I'm already logged in here, and so if I wanted to save this code, what I could do is go to File and then Save, okay? Now, the way it works with this editor is that by default, your document has a kind of a randomized name. So see how it says Reminiscent Serpent? Or if I were to make a new file, it says Bald Attack. I don't know if that's directly against me, but, you know, whatever. So let's say I didn't want to call it Bald Attack, and I wanted to call it, I don't know, Mr. Hurwitch document 1 or something like that. What I could do is click on the little pencil over here. That allows me to type. I can say, you know, Mr. Hurwitch, I don't know, exercise or example 1, let's say. Okay, I'm going to hit return. And that's going to save it, or save my name at least. And then if I decide to save my document, I can hit save. And if I wanted to go, let's just hypothetically say I wanted to open this file later, I could go under File, Open, and then this would list all of my documents that I've created. So if I wanted to open this up, I could just double click on it, and then that would open up the file, okay? And that's pretty much it. You know, I can come in here and we can write code, just like I was showing before. Let x equals 1, let y equal, I don't know, Joe students or something like that. Don't worry about what I'm doing. We'll talk all about this in a little bit. Okay. All right, so I can write code. We talked about saving that code. Let's talk a little bit about structure, okay, or protocol. Sometimes when you work with certain languages, sometimes there's this protocol of how you do things, okay? The example I'm going to give is like, let's say that I am sending a letter, okay? Like a physical snail mail letter, right? There's a protocol of how you set up your letter. Like, this is the way you do it. If you don't do it this way, it's not going to work properly, okay? So if I were to send a letter, the first thing is we have to put a a piece of, I have to put a stamp on it, right? Where does the stamp go? Well, officially it goes in the upper right-hand corner. Why doesn't it go in the upper left-hand corner? Why doesn't it go in the lower left-hand corner? Why doesn't it go in the middle? I don't know. I could not tell you. But the protocol is that you must have a stamp and it must go in the upper right-hand corner. At some point, everyone in the post office got together and said, this is how we're going to do it. You know what I mean? Now, why did they do it this way as opposed to another way? I couldn't tell you. Maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe they just decided and they decided just to go with it. But that's how it works. Okay. Now, if you're sending it to someone, you put the recipient's name in the middle, right? You put their name, you put their address, meaning their address, 123 Main Street. You put the street number or the street. Then you put the city, the state, and then a zip code, right? And then possibly a country if you're sending it internationally. So what, why does the name come first? Why doesn't the street address come first? I don't know. Once again, it's protocol. The US Postal System said this is how you do it, right? And then you put your name in the upper left-hand corner. Why in the upper left? Why not? I don't know. In the lower right? I don't know. Once again, protocol. This is just how you do it, okay? So why am I talking about that? Well, P5.JS actually has its own set of protocol that this is just how it works, okay? You can argue whether it should be done this way or not, but this is just how it works, and you have to accept that, okay? When you set up a new document in P5.JS, you're going to notice that it has something called function setup and function draw. These are two functions that must exist inside of an official P5 document in order for it to run, okay? If it didn't exist, you would have to literally type it in, function setup. That's setup, lowercase, like lowercase setup, and then function draw. Okay. What does these do? Good question. Well, this is what we call a function. I'm going to talk about what functions are later. But for now, like imagine I was going to draw on a piece of paper, like I'm going to use a piece of paper to sketch something. The setup is kind of like the literal piece of paper. Okay. It's like, like the setup, prepares your program for what it's going to do. Okay. That's why it's literally called setup. Imagine you're going to play like a big complicated board game, like, I don't know, Settlers of Catan or Monopoly or Risk or something. And you got like a million pieces you got to like set up and you put them all over here and you shuffle cards and you put all the little trinkets on the board and all that kind of stuff, right? You're not playing the game yet. You're just setting up the game, right? And that's kind of what this is. The setup area of the program is like, this is what's going to happen first before your program even runs. Whatever tasks are here or code is here are going to run first, okay? So the setup happens before the rest of your program, and it only runs once. It never runs more than once during the life of your program, okay? That being said, sometimes there are going to be things that change during your program. For instance, maybe in my program, I'm keeping tally of a score. Like think about a baseball game, right? When a baseball game starts, the score is 0-0 because no one has any previous score. But during the game, people can hit home runs or, whatever, and they can increase their score. So someone hits a home run, it goes from 0-1, and someone hits a double play, and so it goes from 1-3, and, so on and so on. So in the same way, when we run programs, it's like we might have a value that changes. Maybe it starts one way when the program begins, but then during the program, that value changes for some reason. So we have to have a function that basically calculates every frame or every second that the program is running. So if I hit play, hold on one second. Don't worry about what I'm doing here. So if I hit play, my program started 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5, so on and so on. So essentially it's like, okay, while my program is running, I could change that value. And that's what the draw function does. It calculates every single second, to be honest, it really calculates every fraction of a second. And it like re-loops this code and it's like checking for stuff. Okay. And so we're not going to really use that today, but we are going to use this in our next module when we start manipulating data like variables and things like that. Okay. All right, that was a lot, but hopefully that gives you an idea of what P5 is. In the next video, I'm going to go over some general concepts of P5, which include things like, we have to talk a little bit about a coordinate system. I'm also going to talk about what a function is and what arguments are. Okay.